into the future. For me, it was existing one day at a time and just surviving.
So what did you do in your graduation, for your little bit of story and photo? Have you got that book today?
Yes, I do.
You need to share it. You need to share your story there. So what did you say about your vision after you'd had a conversation with the teacher?
Well, the question she asked was, where do I want to go? And
so where do you want to go? Where do you want to be?
Back then, I was dealing with my son who was severely ADHD, so I stepped into teaching. So I then went on to university to get my university degree to become a high school teacher.
And what did you teach? What subjects did you teach?
I was a business teacher.
Right. Okay.
So business and law was my two streams that I taught while I was at high school.
Right. Mm. And how was that? Was that watching the kids learn and evolve and grow? What was it like for you to see that happen because it didn't happen for you?
I had a great insight. As a teacher, I was that child. I was that child that gave up on herself.
And did you see a lot of that in your classes?
Very much so, very much so. I seen kids falling through the cracks and giving up. An example I can give is I had after my second husband passed, I went on to doing relief teaching. So I was teaching in a number of schools and I loved it. And I took all of those learnings to these children, and teachers and staff couldn't believe how I could get these children to be so calm in a classroom when their permanent teacher couldn't.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's all about knowing how to do it, because, of the experience that you'd had and you putting yourself in their situation and thinking, well, I know exactly how you feel. So what did you say to these students when they were, dropping through the cracks, or they didn't want to do their homework, or they didn't want to come to school, or whatever it was? What sort of things did you say to them to encourage them to be their better self?
I recall one time there was a young man in a junior maths class, and I'm not a maths teacher, but as soon as I walked in, and he said to me, "Miss, I can't get it. I haven't got it all year. And my teacher knows I don't get it, and that's okay." And all I said to him was, "Are you willing to work with me?" And he stopped and he thought about it. And I just waited for him to answer. And he said, "Okay, I'll give it a go." And I said, "Excellent." And I showed him just a learning technique. And it had nothing to do with math. It had to do with a technique of learning. Well, within 10 minutes, that young man was jumping out of his seat. His hand was going up and he's going, "Miss, I got it. I got it." Now, that technique has got nothing to do with math, but that young man now has a tool that he can take into science or English or any other subject to succeed. He was over the moon, and that just fills my heart.
So you gave him the confidence to have faith in himself, to know that he could do anything he tried.
Yeah.
And how fabulous is that? How many other students did you create that impression with?
Over years, many students. I even had, when it came to the end of my teaching career, I had a deputy that came and asked me to support a science class, a junior science class, who had never had a science prac all year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because of their behaviour. It was just too dangerous.
Right.
And the deputy asked me to step into this classroom. Well, the kids had an absolute ball.
So what did you do?
I just had a structure for these kids, and it comes with respect.
Yes.
And setting boundaries. So if you want this, work with me, we can have it all.
Mm.
Well, the science aide was just thrilled. She ran into the staff room and said, like, you should have seen Tracey. Like, this teacher that was a science teacher was going to actually give up his career. He was going to throw the towel in because it was just too hard. He actually said to me, you take this class. And I said, no, I'm not a science teacher, but I'm here to support you. But these students knew how I think and what my expectations are.
And they sense it, don't they? They actually do. You don't have to say anything, but they actually sense that someone cares.
Yes.
And they know that some teachers are just beyond that caring because they've tried so hard for such a long time and not got anywhere. And they're thinking, well, what do I do? Everything I try doesn't work. So how do I get something out of these students? Just something little.
But I understand that concept because that's how I was as a mum in the 80s, dealing with a son who was severely ADHD.
And when you found out that he was severely ADHD, what was that feeling like for you? I mean, you knew you would have seen his behaviour, but there wouldn't have been a name to it at that stage until he'd had a diagnosis.
No,
and once,
it was scary.
In what ways?
He was so aggressive. So when he eventually got diagnosed, he was below the lowest line there was on their scale back then.
Right.
With aggression. So as a mum, my fear that he would end up in prison because he would harm somebody. It was that scary.
Did he ever harm you?
He was getting bigger, and there was a time where I lost it with him, and it frightened the life out of me. And I rang my doctor and said, if you don't find something wrong with this child, he's going to kill me or I'm going to kill him, one or the other.
That's not a good result either way.
No. And the doctor said to me, well, we can go through all the things that you've trialed with teachers and guidance officers and counsellors, all of that sort of stuff, or we can go straight to the top. And I said, let's go straight to the top. And we did. And we went to the top psychiatrist on the terrace in Brisbane.
Right.
And we both had to go through this enormous process to be diagnosed, myself as well. And that's how he got diagnosed as severe ADHD, below the lowest line on their scale.
But you don't have ADHD, do you?
No, but I suspect my first husband did.
Yes, it's interesting when you can look back and reflect on the situation and the time, and then understand with your son and how his behaviour is, then there's a relationship there, isn't there? There's a correlation between the two, and you can join the dots.
Well, that as well as my learnings into what I do now, where because I was carrying him when my first husband had his motorbike accident, all the stress and the fear and all of that was going into that baby while he was.
Well, they sense it, don't they, when you're pregnant?
So while I was carrying him when he was born, all he knew was fight or flight. And that's what came out. You know,
How
the
is
learnings and the understanding I have today is different to back in the day. I just had to follow what these so-called experts said.
So how is he today?
Wonderful, gone back to study, has a great life, is big in the outdoors, climbing mountains and kite surfing, doing all of that adrenaline stuff. He loves to do that. But, you know, I'm very pleased to say that he never ended up in jail.
Oh, well, you know,
as a mum, that was my fear.
But you know, you took the steps when you knew what you needed to do to help him turn that corner, because how would he have felt, you know, the frustration, the anger, all those sorts of things that he was going through, but not really understanding why he was like that. Would be a scary thing.
There was an example where I asked him to make his bed and get dressed, and when I went into his room and he hadn't made his bed, he'd got dressed and done the other things, but he just looked at me so sincerely and he said, "Mum, you didn't ask me."
Oh.
You didn't ask me. And what I learned was that the enzymes were being attacked. So with ADHD children, you can only give them chunks of information, not a big string of information, because it gets lost in the translation.
And the overwhelm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So little chunks, not big chunks.
Yeah.
And also have that patience so that they can actually learn and tip the scales so that they can, you know, feel comfortable and normal and not be treated like something different, because they tend to be treated like something different if they're not diagnosed or whatever it is.
You have to understand that if people don't understand what they're dealing with, and for me, it wasn't a matter of just, you know, getting the medication and hoping it would all figure out. I wasn't that sort of person. I had to find a solution to the problem, and that's who I am. So I did, and it was a matter of trial and error on lots of different strategies and tools, and it would take me about 3 hours just to get through his homework together.
3 hours?
Yeah.
Wow. So you would sit there with him and help him with his homework?
No, he could do it. He could do the work, but you had to understand that he had to do it by rote, and he needed to do it in increments. So I would have a timer where I would have it on for 10 minutes.
Right.
Because anything beyond 10 minutes, he'd be off with the fairies. And he could sit at the table as if he's working, but he's actually out into
somewhere out there thinking, dreaming, daydreaming. Yeah.
So you do 10 minutes on maths and 10 minutes on English and 10 minutes on science and those sorts of things. And my other children, well, they could get all their homework done in 30 minutes.
30 minutes. And you spent 3 hours with him.
But that's what you have to do.
Fantastic.
No, but I also had to educate the school.
How did that go down?
I suppose I approach things I don't demand and I don't expect. I just go, well, are you willing to work with me? And over time, the school actually had to take him out of that pool of students because he just didn't fit anymore.
But he still stayed in the school and in the school system as normal.
Yes, but we created systems in play. So ultimately, over the years, what I had to learn and teach him was the power was within him. As a mum, I couldn't be with him 24/7.
No.
I had to teach him to recognise his feelings and emotions and know where that breaking point was. And if he crossed it, there was going to be a consequence.
A big consequence.
Yes.
But, you know, if you teach a child to understand that, then they know that if they don't do what's meant to happen, there is a consequence. And whatever that consequence is created by their inaction or overreaction to whatever it might be. And so they have to learn to deal with that. And I think the school system now kind of, I don't know. That
was one of the things I put it as a structure as a teacher in my classrooms. And students arrived, they knew me well enough to know that I said what I meant and I meant what I said. And that was vitally important for my son as well as students that were in my class.
And you would have had a lot of respect.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids that would learn to, what do you say, learn to work because they felt like they deserved to get a result and to feel good about themselves.
Some did, some didn't. Some would just go, oh, it's her. And they just knew my boundaries and they just knew that they had to just do the work for 70 minutes and then they could move on to their next class. But they knew my boundaries because I never changed them. Did
the other kids know your boundaries?
Yes, it was well known. I would turn up to a class for a lesson and they would just say to the, oh, you know, that's what she expects. So just, yeah. They would just
do it. But that's fabulous.
I had a reputation, I suppose, of what.
Not a bad reputation, a good reputation, because you got results for kids that would never have obviously gotten results any other way.
Yes.
So learning boundaries and teaching them to understand that, you know, there are boundaries in place for a reason. And if you don't do what's meant to happen, then there's a consequence and you have to deal with the consequence. Which is the better, dealing with the consequence or doing the work and working within the boundaries?
Well, usually you get the work done quicker and then your own time's your own to, you know, sit and do something else that you wanted to do.
Exactly.